Now, obviously, I'm going a bit further back for this one, but Sullivan's Travels is one of the most famous comedies ever made and was written and directed by an absolute master of the craft, Preston Sturges. And please forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But as the title of this video implies, it's actually Strudges himself I'm going to be focusing more on in this video rather than the movie itself. And with that being said, there actually won't be too many spoilers for this movie ahead. However, I still think this video will mean more to you if you have seen it. So while definitely not required viewing, I do believe you'll take more away from this if you have watched it first. Not that I want or expect you to sit down and watch a whole movie just so you can understand one of my videos. But either way, let's get into it. Now, the main point about Strudges I want to discuss here is why he made Sullivan's Travels in the first place. And to quote him directly, he said he made the movie as a reaction to all the preaching he saw in other comedies of the time. Because according to him, these comedies had, quote, seemed to have abandoned the fun in favor of the message. And that's basically the point of Sullivan's Travels. That it's okay for comedies to just be comedies. And that the only thing some people have in life is to get a good laugh every once in a while. Now, both at the time and nowadays, some have accused Strudges of being a hypocrite for saying this because he almost always put messages into his movies, and some would say no more than Sullivan's Travels at that. And that most certainly is true, especially because there's an almost 10-minute montage depicting realistic poverty and quite a few discussions regarding that and the people that have to live in it. However, while I can see where they're coming from, I think they're missing a crucial point about what Strudges was saying. Because he wasn't saying that comedy movies shouldn't have a message, just that it shouldn't come at the expense of the laughs. Because when you really think about it, what does this have to do with poverty? Or this? My point is that Strudges never let the moral of his stories get in the way of making the audience laugh, and that's what he felt other comedies were doing. Because if you've seen his other movies, you'll find that he usually dedicated one or two scenes to being serious and getting his point across to the audience, while the rest of the time he's just trying to come up with as many gags as possible, while sometimes setting up those scenes in the subtlest ways possible. Now sure, Sullivan's Travels does delve into more serious territory, but that was probably because he decided to treat the subject of poverty with the utmost respect and moved the funny elements, which as I've already said, this movie does have plenty of, elsewhere. So I guess what I'm saying here is, I feel that he was justified in making that statement and that he wasn't contradicting himself when he said it. But to get to the point of this video, Sullivan's Travels was released in 1940. Now let me ask you this. Even if you don't agree with that yourself, how many times have you heard people saying recently that movies have abandoned all the fun in favor of the message? Because I don't know about you, but I was quite stunned the first time I read that quote, because it felt like something ripped straight out of a headline from last week, rather than something a famous director had said almost a century ago. But the saddest part about the whole thing might just be that Strudges had no idea how right he actually was. Because as somebody who's watched many movies from all across cinema's history, I can safely say that what he said, as well as the general moral behind Sullivan's Travels, is even more relevant today than when he made it. Because no matter how right or wrong he was at the time, that trend didn't last. Throughout the latter half of the 40s and the 50s, comedies were mostly just comedies, and the messages were mostly relegated to straight dramas and other things of that nature. And even then, half the time they didn't even have a defined moral. And even when a comedy did have a message, it followed Sturges' formula much closer and put the jokes and fun first and foremost. Now, look at the types of movies we get today. Literally everything has some kind of moral or message behind it, and it's usually not delivered subtly either. Heck, as I must have already said in half the videos on this channel, even children's movies have complex morals that the kids more often than not won't even pick up on. Now listen, I'm not against a movie having a moral or message in it, or anything else the writer wants to convey. I've got nothing against that. It's the fact that that seems to have become the only thing that the writers are focused on, and that they are usually delivering it in very obvious ways to the point that it sometimes starts to get in the way of the story. Forget about the fun, that I believe is the problem here. Because I can't remember the last movie I saw made in the past 5 to 10 years that didn't have an obvious message behind it. At least, none that were any good anyway. And no, I'm not counting superhero movies, because even if they arguably haven't forgotten about the fun, there's still plenty of messages in them. And I do believe that the genre that suffered the most from this is comedy. I mean, I can't believe some of these movies being released that are considered funny. Because when you aren't being nihilistic, disgusting, and completely mean-spirited, they're also shoving morals down your throat in ways that would leave even a toddler rolling its eyes. Now, are some of these messages things worth saying? Absolutely. But do people want to be being bashed over the head with them when all they want is some fun and a few laughs? No. If anything, it ends up making them resent that message because it's getting in the way of the fun, as Sturges himself undoubtedly felt. Because as I've said before, even with Sturges feeling that way, there were still comedies being made at the time and afterwards that were all about the fun and laughs with no moral to be had. I mean, if you just wanted a good time, you could easily check out the latest Bob Hope movie, He Never Had a Message, or anything else starring any number of equally famous comedians or made by famous comedy directors. So my point is, even if there were some comedies that had lost their way, there were still plenty that hadn't. To use that same example, Bob Hope even said his goal with his career was only to make people happy and feel better about their lives. And many other comedians in movies at that time have voiced very similar opinions. But today, what can you really go to if you just want to have a good time? It's like everything has to be grounded, realistic, even if there's magic involved, and have some real emotional weight, and tell as many vulgar jokes as possible. It's like, when you really look at it, it's no wonder modern comedies are a shell of their former selves. They aren't allowed to have fun anymore. I mean, if you do make something that's just meant for genuine fun, play certain comedy tropes completely straight, and try to stay away from vulgar humor, you're immediately written off. Now, personally, I feel that just the quality of the jokes themselves have gotten way too black, but I'll save that for a future video. But to be fair, I have seen many people come to the defense of one particular movie made in the past 5 years that critics weren't overly impressed by. The Greatest Showman. And I've seen a lot more people than you'd expect say that it's the only movie made in a while that they've actually enjoyed watching. And I believe the answer for why that is very clear. It was just wholesome entertainment. It didn't matter that it wasn't accurate to real life, or that it didn't focus on certain characters very much, or even that it wasn't written as well as it could have been. All that mattered was that it actually gave the audience what they wanted. a more or less wholesome story that was fun to watch with absolutely no catch at the end. And that's exactly what it was. And while it may not be the most perfect movie otherwise, people are still willing to defend it regardless because it's one of the very few movies released recently that actually dared to just have some fun. And I think it's very telling that it's that movie, out of all the ones released in the past few years, the one that wasn't vulgar or trying too hard to push a message at the sake of the fun, that people are quick to defend or say is their favorite modern movie. So what I'm obviously getting at here is, I think more people out there should take Strudge's words to heart. Because what he shows us in Sullivan's Travels is absolutely true. That comedy, the ability to laugh, and the ability to make people laugh is all some people have in this world. And it's something that we all need. And if you ask me, that's been all but forgotten in modern Hollywood, even when it comes to children's entertainment. And that's the main reason I decided to make this video. I just couldn't believe how relevant and ahead of his time Strudges really was with that statement. But all I have really left to say is, though he died over 60 years ago, if he could see what modern movies have become, I can't even imagine what he would say or the movie he'd make in response to it. But at the same time, I guess through the reaction to The Greatest Showman, he might have taken some comfort in the fact that the majority of people out there do still appreciate his kind of entertainment, as well as the fact that some, no matter how few they may be, are still trying to give it to the masses. But even with all of that, I feel that the wisdom of his words, both in that quote and Sullivan's Travels, should be better remembered and be taken more seriously in Hollywood across the board. That we don't always need or want a tragedy that gives us some huge life lesson. Sometimes we just need something that'll make us laugh and have a little fun. Okay, I think that's everything I have to say on that. But now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that Preston Sturges was way ahead of his time with that moral behind Sullivan's Travels, or do you think the movie industry is doing just fine? Please feel free to tell me in the comments. And please remember, you are entitled to your own opinion on this matter. You don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. And I'm also not trying to bash or promote any hate to the people who make modern comedies. I understand that most of them are very talented people and that a lot of work goes into the making of them. All I'm saying is I'm not a fan of their humor, and you don't have to agree with me on that at all if you wish. And lastly, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.